Okay, the webinar is now live and we're letting in attendees. We're ready to go.
Great, thank you. I am calling to order the Finance and Administration Committee meeting and Board of Directors meeting for March 25th, 2021, and we're going to begin with a roll call.
Director Bregman.
Here.
Director Gibson.
Here.
Director Russell.
Here.
Director Schmidt.
Here.
And President Kohler.
I'm here. I now need a motion to adopt the agenda, please.
So moved. Second.
Second.
Director Bregman.
Aye.
Director Gibson.
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye.
Director Schmidt.
Aye.
And President Kohler.
Aye. We are moving on now to public comment on any item that is not on the agenda. Carrie, do we have any public comments?
I think so. Let me check with Mr. Roberts.
Okay. And remember, this is the moment to comment on items that are not agendized. Plenty of time to comment on the agendized items as we go through them.
Go ahead, Mr. Roberts, if you have a comment. Okay, I don't think so. Okay.
Hey, Roger, we're glad you're with us. And so we don't think there's any other public comment?
No, there's only three.
There was a public comment that I think is worth mentioning that we got from Mr. Kramer.
Yeah.
This is about, I don't know, water measurements and how much water we should be producing in the watershed versus what we're actually using. And he points out, he makes some interesting calculations about water and what we should be harvesting. So that I would appreciate it if staff could take a look at that and get back to us, and so we could, have a discussion about it one way or the other.
Yes, Director Bregman, we were going to look into it and get back to him and share with you. I suspect, but we'll know for sure, that his assumption on the runoff may be the issue, but we'll loop back with him and fill you guys in on what
13% or whatever that he assumes.
President Kohler, actually, Mr. Roberts, would like to speak. So
great, go ahead.
I'm trying to unmute him. Go ahead, sir.
No, I don't want to speak. I don't know how the hand was raised. I didn't do it.
Okay.
Yeah, right, Roger.
Sir.
You didn't do it.
Yeah.
Sure.
It could be residual. You could have a residual hand raise. I got called on that a couple times yesterday during our 10-year financial.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're good.
Okay. So even though technically we don't have a moment for director's announcements, I'm going to take the prerogative of the chair to let everybody know, and some of you may have seen this in the morning's DWR clips, if you read those, that our former general manager, our good friend Krishna Kumar, has just been appointed to be the general manager at Madison, Wisconsin. I don't know if any of you are dialed in there, but Mayor Satya Conway Rhodes is a friend, an extraordinarily progressive person who's been involved in water issues for a long time. So anyway, I just thought I would share with everybody about
Good
Krishna's
news.
new job.
That's good news. He gets to live near his daughter now.
I assumed that's what it was.
Yeah, he followed his daughter to Madison. So
Yeah, and also near the North Pole.
Yeah.
no, it's pretty nice.
It's pretty chilly there, I'll tell you.
That's a little.
I've
chilly.
been in the summertime and it's like 60 in the middle of the summer. It's like, whoa, doggies.
It builds character
Yeah, you don't freeze to death.
Indeed, it does.
and drinking.
Indeed, it
yes.
absolutely does. Anyway, I just thought I would share. With that, let's move on to our first agenda item, which is approving the minutes of the last meeting, which was February 25th, 2021.
So moved.
So I'm looking for a motion.
Second.
Director Bregman.
Aye.
Director Gibson.
Aye.
Director Russell.
Aye.
Director Schmidt.
Aye.
And President Kohler.
Aye. So that brings us to the monthly financial update, which is an information item.
Morning, President Kohler and directors. Okay, this will be a review of the of the financial position for February. We'll start off as usual, looking at our revenues. And if we are tracking linearly, we're 2/3 of the way through the year in February, 66.7% of budget.
I'm not sure if this is too bit, but Chuck, you're sounding muffled to me. Is that anybody else having that problem?
Little bit. I can hear him okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that any better if I move in here?
Yeah, I think it is.
Okay. So we're at 74% of budget for water revenues. That's water sales, service charges, and watershed management fee. And you can see those delineated on attachment 3 to your package. Then other revenues.
Sorry.
Presentation. The rents, grants, and watershed payments, interest, things like those are amalgamated in the other revenues. And you see there we're at about 57% of budget. So it looks like our total operating revenues are at 73% of budget. So a little bit ahead of that 67% marker or straight line measurement. And then fire flow fees, which we collect through the property tax bills, are 50% as we've received the January remittance. And then capital revenues, including capital maintenance fee, are at 61.8%. So running just a little bit behind budget there. So if we look at the total for all revenues, we're at about 71% of budget through the year. And then as we've been doing, we're going through and kind of breaking these out by month. So you can see on the water sales that overall we're at 104% of budget, so a little bit ahead. But if you look at how that's tracking throughout the different months, you can see that it tracks all over the place. So in February, our actuals were actually about 400,000 behind what our budget was. But then January and December, we were running ahead. So not an exact science here, but you can see that that the numbers aren't always right on target with the budget. And then service charges are at 103%, and the watershed fees at 97% of our revenues. So we look here at our monthly water sales comparisons, and this is dollars in thousands. So you can see in February, we're tracking right about on with last year, that red bar there, just a little bit ahead. And a lot of that is just due to the rate increase that we had. And then you can see in January that we tracked a little bit behind. Of note, in February here, we did have, last February, we had no rainfall. I think that was a record. And then this February, we had about 2¼ inches. So seems to be tracking right about on. And then we've been giving you this breakdown in CCF comparisons in thousands. And this is by Resi code or customer class here. And as you can see, overall, we're up about 278,000, and that's about a 4% increase total. Most of that is represented in single family, so that's a 10% increase there at 451. And then the commercial and industrial, as you would probably expect, and institutional, you've got some drop off there. So in commercial and industrial, that's about an 18% drop. And then we've also been showing you the accounts receivable aging, which has become of more interest this year. Up to 30 days, we've got an increase from $612 to $829,000. Pretty big increase there. The 60-day category is moved from 262 to 870, an increase of 608 compared to the same time last year. And then you can see that those trends continue on as we continue out to 1 year of aging. And then we again kind of dissect that 60-day past due. So just this line item here, and we look at that by the different customer classes, what's going on there. So with those customers that are 60 days past due, you can see that a very marked increase there in single family residential and in these other categories. And we've increased from 262,000 to 870,000 in past due. And so it's kind of interesting to look at our bad debt expense through February. So last year through February, our bad debt expense was looking like it was about $200,000. This year through February, bad debt expense is looking closer to $1.6 million. So definitely starting to see that impact. And then we show you tier consumption. The biggest element of note here is that our tier 1 and tier 2 make up about 90% of our consumption. And you can see that the overall consumption CCFs is well over that high mark on here at 15, when I believe that's when the last drought came into effect. So you can see that fall in consumption in those following years. And then we've returned to at least normal level now. So now we turn to the AMI data, and this is for Tiburon Belvedere, about 1,200 meters. And this is all single family residents. And you can see these numbers for February. January, we had that jump up in Tiburon Belvedere on the AMI meters. And then in February, this kind of comports more with what we showed you before, where we're actually down a little bit on the consumption in this area. And then we again look at AMI data. These are institutional business meters, much smaller sample size. This is 84 meters. And again, you can see kind of the same trend there, where we're down a little bit in consumption for February. And now we'll turn to the expenditure side of the budget. So personnel services, those are all those things like wages and benefits, health costs. Those are at 62.7% of budget. So we're tracking right about on there, a little bit behind, probably due to just some marginal vacancies. Maintenance and operating expenses are pretty close to budget at 71%. Financing costs, we allocate those out throughout the year, so they always match budget exactly. And then the capital allocation, that labor that we capitalize for capital projects, we're 62.2% of budget. And then you can see below that the fire flow projects will run about 27.3% of budget. And then district projects, including capital equipment purchases, we show here 31.1%. However, again, we've been giving the board this different look at the expenditure side. So you can see now that when we add in these capital encumbrances of $11.4 million, we're actually at about 66% of budget. So we're about right on. So we actually let some major contracts since the last meeting with the board. So you can see this number has gone up quite a bit.
Why is fire flow so far off there, Chuck?
It's probably just the timing of the projects. I know that before the actual fire flow fund balance had gotten very, very low. So they were by design building that back up, and they kind of slowed down projects to get that fund balance back to a healthy level. I think that's part of why that is.
Okay.
And you can actually see here that fire flow fund has come up from 2 million to 2.7 million. And I believe we went back, we started in the previous fiscal year, that was actually down close to zero. So I think by design, they've been bringing that fund balance back up. And then this is a look at our fund balances overall. So the restricted and designated funds, those are for things like workers' comp and general liability and debt service, where those funds are restricted for certain purposes. You can see rate stabilization has stayed steady at $9.4 million. And we've got fire flow funds we just talked about have increased by $700,000 up to $2.7 million. Pension reserve is stable at $2 million. And then our capital fund, which we aim to have 1 year of capital projects in there, is at $20.4 million. So we're right about on with our policy there. Unrestricted funds, $34.6 million. So that's what we often refer to as our reserve. So that's available, especially when we start talking about the upcoming financial implications of the drought. Of course, we have rate stabilization reserve funds that we can dip into. We can use this operating reserve, and we could also look at things like the pension fund, as that's a designation by the board. So total fund balances are looking about $91 million. Operating fund balance to budget in months, we're at 4.8. Our policy is 6 months, so we're moving in the right direction there. Debt service coverage, we projected it at 3 times coverage. Our minimum is 1.25. So again, judging by that metric, it's pretty healthy. Outstanding bond debt is $142 million as we continue to defease those issues. And then the smaller debts that we have, like Las Colinas Sanitary, $7.3 million. And then we've been showing the board also just the impacts from COVID. And again, this is from the beginning of event in about March. So far the district's expended $478,000. Most of that, the preponderance of that $478,000 has been spent on deep spray of buildings and vehicles, about $175,000. And then we've had a sick leave that's allowed for under the CARES Act of about $170,000. So that's primarily what makes up that number there. So in summary, revenues and expenditures, we're tracking pretty close to budget. Our fund balances, as we talked about right now, look healthy. And the COVID from a financial impact has been relatively minor.
Well, except for the past due debt. I mean, you're looking at a COVID reaction of maybe $1.5 million actually overall.
How so, Jack?
That is true. If you're looking at that as one of the costs, it's just interesting. As we saw the survey from Wharton, there could be a lot of variables that are affecting past due or delinquent accounts. So.
I thought it was an excellent report, really thorough.
Yeah.
Really covered everything. The couple takeaways is for me is reduction of commercial and industrial use as we go into drought, and as the economy picks up, that's gonna kind of conflict. 10% increase in residential, we got to start getting the word out that our single family customers need to start, figuring out how to use less. And the past due, which we've discussed before, which is sort of, that's significant. So anyway, I thought it was a great report. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, I concur. Any other board comments on this? Very helpful, Chuck, really.
Yeah.
Any public comments on this item? Okay.
Let me
Then,
look.
okay.
No hands are raised at this time.
Okay. Then we will move on from the monthly update to item 3, which is review and comment on the operating and capital budget for fiscal year 2022 and 23. This is also an information item.
Okay, thank you. So yes, we'll talk about the upcoming budget in this item. This is the biennial 2-year budget that starts from fiscal year 21-22. So I'm going to take the first part of this and talk a bit about the operating side of the budget, and then Mike Bond is going to take over at the capital portion and talk about our CIP budget. So first thing I want to do is just give the committee and the board a kind of a view of what the process here is. So the budget process really began in September when we start looking at our revenues and what resources we have for the coming year. And obviously in September, the drought probably wasn't front of mind, although it's obviously moving there as we move through this process. But as we looked at where our revenues were going, we assumed that 4% growth rate that we showed you in the long range forecast also. And so we had to publish guidelines for the divisions to prepare their budgets. And basically what we told them was that we've we've got a year where we really need to maintain pretty much status quo. There's some things that we wanted to accomplish in this budget, but for the most part, we wanted to keep everything status quo, as you know, as we're dealing with relatively tight budgets here. So over the period from October until today, we've been working with the divisions, we've been working with the general manager, and we've been, going through iterations on this to kind of get this budget to where we want it, and that's what we'll be showing you today is essentially a status quo budget. So today we'll talk about this with the committee here, and then in April we will come back with inputs from the committee. And we'll bring you the preliminary budget document for your review. And then if all goes well, we will adopt the budget in May. Our plan right now. So a couple of highlights for the budget. As I mentioned, although it's a status quo budget, and we really don't have a lot of additional resources for the district right now, we did hear the board that the additional rangers on the watershed was an important item. So one of the things that this budget does is that we add one ranger in the first fiscal year. We had a second ranger in the second fiscal year. Part of the resource that allowed us to do that was, you'll recall that we did an advance refunding on the 2012 bonds, and that you'll see in here gives us roughly about $500,000 of savings starting in the second year of the budget. So that gives us some resources for those rangers. We also provided funding in this budget for a couple of other things. The water recreation plan. So there's $400,000 in the budget over 2 years that provides for that recreation plan. Part of that is developing the plan, and then CEQA analysis if needed. If that CEQA analysis is not needed, part of that $400,000 could actually be put towards projects on the watershed. And then there were some studies that were included in here that were deemed important. Water quality studies. One of those is looking at algae in our lakes and the way to deal with that. That was about $250,000 added there. And then we added another $50,000 on study for Sewell-Hooley to look at some trace elements that they wanted to study. And then I brought out employee training. So when we started this budget, we were trying to look for places where we could create a little bit of capacity for things like the rangers. We looked at places we could cut. One of those places was employee training. And this is one of those areas where the general manager and division heads really thought it was important to keep this employee training for the next few fiscal years to continue to develop our workforce. So that was one of the things that we continued to provide fully budgeted in the biennial budget. So a little bit of background. One thing we provide here is a balanced budget, and you'll see that we actually use some fund balance in the first year budget, but again, that's by design, and we'll talk about the timing of CIP projects there. Again, we did assume revenue escalation for the 2 years at 4%. So your operating budgets, as I'll show you here, are at $88.7 million and $92.2 million for fiscal year 22 and 23. That's about a 2.9% increase in 22 and about 4% increase in 23. And then, as I mentioned, this budget increases our full-time equivalent employees by 2. And on the capital side, we had $26.1 million in 22 and $22.4 million in 23. So that maintains our current levels of investment, and that's fully funded by the capital maintenance fee and fire flow. So here, just kind of give you a simplified look of the budget overall. This kind of breaks down the table that's in the staff report. And here you can see that in the first year, 21-22, we've got revenues of $111.4 million, servicing expenses of $114.8 million. So we dip into fund balance there by $3.4 million the first year. And again, the reason for that isn't that we're out of balance. As we are on pay-go with the capital maintenance fee, those funds build up, but aren't the revenue intake isn't necessarily aligned with the expenditure plan. So in some years we expend more than revenues, but that money's been set aside within the capital maintenance fee fund for those projects. So we're just dipping into that fund balance by design in the first year of the budget. And then the second year of the budget, we have $115.6 million, and that is servicing expenses of $114.6 million. So we actually have an addition to fund balance there of $1 million.
Now, why, Chuck? Why? I mean, given the fact that we're going into a drought and we're going to be encouraging people to use less water, why do we think our revenues are going up?
As I mentioned before, development of this, the drought wasn't really front of mind. So we don't really know what's going to happen with the revenues. We can assume they're going to go down, but we don't know. So I think for planning purposes, when we develop this, we kind of maintain this based on that long range forecast that we showed you on Tuesday with the 10-year plan. And the idea being that when we start feeling those impacts of reduced demand in the drought, that's likely going to be serviced through use of fund balance. That's what the plan is going to be for covering that. But we don't really know what the revenues are going to do in the next few years. We assume they're going to.
Can I chime in for just a minute? I just wanted to know what we're thinking is when we bring this back next month, we could have a designated slide that talks about the approach to meet the expected drop in revenue due to conservation, and it's ballpark $20 million. Of course, the board will have the option of drought rates, but assuming not, we would lay out how much could come from the reserves and what reserves, and what we could potentially do with belt tightening in context of this 21-22 budget. So we would lay that out and get input from the board next month.
It'd be interesting to compare some of the budget from, didn't the district do 25% conservation, 5 years ago, something like that?
Yes, about that time we did get about 20-25 around that drop.
So it'd
due
be
to
interesting
conservation.
to take a look at that budget and see, how it worked out. At least it would be for me if
Okay, we'll take a look at that. How much reserves we tapped, what we did with the budget.
yeah, thanks.
So here's an overall view of the entire budget, including capital. So you can see bottom line for the fiscal year 22 budget request here. It's $114.8 million. So that's a 6.4% increase over the previous year. I would like to point out here that when we put together the staff report last week, this number was a bit higher. This was, I think, 8.3%. So we actually made a correction in here of a little over $1 million. So this number's actually come down a bit. So we now have a 6.4% increase. So if you're looking at the table on page 2 of your staff report, this replaces that. And then you can see in the second year, we go to 114.6 million total. And we'll go through these line items here in a little more detail in a further slide. But you can see personnel services are up 2.3% in the first year. General and admin's up a little bit over 12%. Materials and supplies are down a little bit under 1%. Operations are up at 11.5%. And then debt service falls down a little bit in the first year. And then as we mentioned, with the as we start to see the effects of that advanced refunding, it falls by about 5% in the second year. And then allocation to capital, that's the amount that we capitalize on labor for capital projects. And that's going up by 10% in the coming year. And part of that's because of that bump that you see in capital projects up to $26 million. So your total operating budget, as we mentioned previously, is up by about 3% in the first year, 4% in the second year. And you can see that the capital and fire flow projects increase about 20, but up to $26 million, about 20% increase over 2 years. And again, that's just timing of projects. And then we'll look at revenues. So you can see here, these are the typical buckets that we show you in the monthly financial report. And you can see here is 2021, what our revenues are looking like. And then going forward in 21, 22, and 23, our budget years, what we forecast. And as we said before, you can see that we've got a little bit of a drop here, about $600,000 drop in the first year of our budget in the water sales. And again, we thought that the water sales for the current year were probably a little bit high, a little bit anomalous due to the COVID event and a very dry year. So we had dropped that down a little bit, basically taking that back to normal. Obviously, with our conversation about the drought, that number may drop significantly more. Watershed management fee stays stable. Other operating revenues, you can see that drop from 1920 from $4.3 million down to $2.8 million, and that stays pretty stable for the horizon of the budget here. That drop is primarily due to the drop in interest that we're getting on the portfolio. So, back in 1920, WAIF was well over 1%. Now it's well below 0.5%. So that's having a bit of effect on our revenue projections. And then fire flow fees are stable at $4.5 million. Capital maintenance fee that grows a little bit to $17.4 million and $18.1 million over the budget. And again, that's assuming that 4% increase. And then other capital contributions dropped from 1920 down to the current year by about $1.2 million. And we've kept those at that $800,000 level. And those are primarily from new connections. So we've seen a drop off in that in this year, and we don't see any reason to think that there will be any acceleration in that revenue source. So overall, we see our total revenues at $110.7 million in the current year, going to $111.4 million in 21-22, and up to $115.6 million in the second year of the budget.
Chuck, I have a quick question. Do we capitalize employee costs on capital projects? So, I mean, are those costs like moved from operations into capital?
Yes, Director Bragman. So here you can see this allocation of capital. That
I see.
$5.2 million. That's a negative number, and that's exactly what's happening there. We're taking this out of operating expense for labor, and we're capitalizing that into a project.
Okay. And then just another quickie is that, so when the new Morgan Stanley bonds kick in, we have about a 6% reduction of costs.
Yeah, I think it was about 4.7.
Okay.
Yeah, there's the debt service reductions, about 4.7% decrease in costs. So about $500,000 a year.
And what's the 0.6 reduction?
That's probably just on timing of you could have some annual debt services that may go down a little bit over time. It just depends on how they set tranches in the beginning.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, so now we'll break it down to operating budget comparison. So again, I kind of walked through this earlier. We can see that our operating budget overall got about 3% increase going from 21-22 to 23, 4% increase. So the budget's going up, but again, it's going up modestly, and it's staying within that that 4% cap that we have on the revenue side. So we'll kind of break down this operating budget a little bit more here. Talk about some of the drivers in each of these categories. So you can see personnel services there going up by 2.3% in the first year. And, that's a number of things. A lot of that is just COLAs. So we had 2.5% last year. I believe we have 2% this year. And then you have step increases and those type of things on top of that. We have some increase in pension costs that we talked with the board about, and then health insurance and benefit costs. So when we put all of that together, we've got a 2.3% increase total in personnel services. General administration, that second line there, has got a pretty marked increase, about 12.5%. A lot of what we're seeing in this budget is increase in some of the permit fees, and those are the fees that we pay to local governments mostly when we go out to do projects. Those have increased quite a bit. We've seen a pretty big increase on bank fees on our side, and a lot of that's from more people using online payment and phone payment. So there's a lot of that is merchant servicing for credit cards. Obviously, the board's aware that in the past several years, we've seen pretty big increases in our insurance costs. We saw those go from $790,000 in premiums up to $875,000 in premiums in the coming year. And our insurance broker is telling us that, based on the risk profiles that the whole state's seen from things like wildfires, they're expecting increases of anywhere from 20 to 25% in those premiums. So that's an area that's definitely seen some large increases. Materials and supplies, really what's driving that, we're seeing increases in some of the chemical costs, pretty marked increases. But what's offsetting that in this budget is that we budgeted for 5,300 acre feet from Sonoma Water. That's what we use as a normal assumption in our budgets. That's the minimum. Last year, though, the actual was 5,800 acre feet that we purchased. So that accounts for a lot of that decrease that you see in materials and supplies. And then in operations, we had an 11.5% increase, but some of that's from those two areas that we talked about. We've got some studies going on there, the lake algae study, and we have the watershed recreation plan of $300,000 in the first year of the biennial budget. So those are just some of the things that are kicking up those operations expenses. Paving associated costs, those went up by over 60%.
Wow.
I think, if we look back to the actuals, we were spending a little bit under $1 million in fiscal year 18, and that's gone up to $1.4 million now. I think what's really kind of driving that on the budget side is that we weren't budgeting enough for that item. So in this budget, we've actually increased that budget to match what the experience has been with those paving costs. So that's why you're seeing that 60% increase in a single year for that item. And then I just wanted to show the board, as I showed, you can see between first year and the second year, we're adding 1 FTE per year. I just kind of wanted to go back and look at the last several years and what staffing's looked like. And you can see if you go back to fiscal year 9-10, a year or two into the Great Recession, you can see that we dropped from 266 positions and we dropped that down to 239, and we've stayed pretty steady there at 240 since. So this is really a very modest addition to the FTE count for the district. And then we wanted to take a quick look at our reserves. So the first reserve is insurance policy reserves. So those are for general liability events that we might have. By policy, we budget that at 6 times the self-insured retention. So if you remember last year during the discussion on insurance, we used to have self-insured retention of $250,000. That increased to $1 million, which was one of the ways that we kept our premium somewhat affordable. And so, $1 million times 6, simple math, we took that up to $6 million in the budget to meet policy. Workers' compensation reserve fund, we kept stable, and that's really based on a biannual actuary that's done. So, we will meet that actuarial requirement if that goes up, or it could go down too, based on what our experience has been. Capital reserve fund, as we mentioned, policies to keep that at 1 year's worth of projects, and that's what we expect during the life of this budget. Pension reserve fund will stay stable at $2 million. Rate stabilization fund expected to stay stable at $9.4 million. And then our operating reserve, we just froze that at $34 million for the life of the budget. That obviously, per our discussion on the drought, that reserve balance could change, but we expect that at that level to meet about 4 months of operating reserve compared to our policy level of 6 months. And then we looked at our debt service ratios, expect that to maintain at 3 for the first year and 3.5 in the second year. Part of that is that debt service payment falls for the 2012 bond issues. And our policy, of course, is to maintain 1.25 of coverage for debt service. So that's the operating budget side. We can take questions now or move into the CIP budget. It's at the board's behest.
I have a question, and it just it's just something that was raised in your discussion about the increase in revenue or money for testing, and this is more directed towards Ben. Are we going to test Sulahuli water before we, start pumping it into the system?
Yes, Paul's on and he can add to it, but we test all the lakes comparably at the same frequency. So at this point, we are confident and feel good that that's safe water to drink, compliant water, and pretty comparable with our sources that we typically tap.
And when's the last time we tested it?
Paul may have that. Do you know the frequency, Paul?
Yeah, excuse me. We test the lakes quarterly. So it would have been in February, and I think we're due to head out there either April or May.
Could we get it tested before we, add it to the system if that's what it's going to come to?
We can, of course, if that's the board's direction, but the water quality in the reservoir doesn't change on an order of months.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Could you send us the last test you did then?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks a lot. That's it for me.
Would you like to move on to capital budget? Okay. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Bond, and he'll walk through the capital side.
Thank you,
Great,
Chuck.
thanks.
Mike Bond here, Director of Engineering. So it's my pleasure to present the next 2-year fiscal capital improvement program budget for the district. If you could go to the next slide, please, Chuck. So it's interesting for us, we're the oldest municipal water district in California. So that means our capital improvement program is really dedicated to investing in what we have. We're not growing, we're not expanding our system, we're not building new necessarily. We're investing almost essentially 100% into what we have. Our capital improvement program budget comprises 2 components. We have our 10-year plan, which guides our long-term thinking, kind of sets the path for where we're headed. And that starts with our 2-year plan, which is fiscal years ending 22 and 23. And the 2-year budget really establishes the CIP budget and authorizes expenditures for that budget. Next slide, please. So this graph represents the budget for the next 2 years, which are shown in the green bars, as Chuck mentioned. Next fiscal year, the budget is 26.1 million. And in the following fiscal year, it's 22.4 million. And then the blue bars represent the remainder of the 10-year CIP. The total 10-year budget is $255 million with an average investment level of 25.5. And the horizons that you see in fiscal 24, 25, and 26, those are driven by the investments in replacement of Ross Reservoir and Pine Mountain Tunnel. And as you can imagine, capital projects don't follow kind of a neat expenditure and investment level. They do go up and down depending on the projects we're undertaking. And so for those years when we're under the average investment, funds are going into our fund balance. And then for the higher years like 25 and 26, the difference between the revenue and the expenditure that year is made up by fund balance. Next slide, please. So the rest of my presentation is going to focus on the 2-year budget and talk about what we plan to do for the next 2 years. The total 2-year budget is $48.5 million. And I'm going to talk about some of the interesting projects we'll be working on and some of our key projects. So next slide, please. So we'll start off by talking about pipelines. The 2-year budget includes $17.9 million in funding for replacement of district pipelines, and that will allow us to replace about 8 miles of pipes. And this includes $9 million in funding from the Fire Flow Improvement Program. So this first project I wanted to share with you is our Green Brave Boardwalk Pipeline Replacement Project. This project has an interesting history. The pipeline, as you can see, it's shown in yellow here on the figure on the left, runs along the Green Brave Boardwalk and was installed in 1967 as a private pipe by the Green Brave Boardwalk Waterline Trustees was the name of the group. And the pipeline serves 50 homes out there adjacent to the boardwalk. And in 1994, ownership of this pipeline was transferred to the district. The pipeline is 4-inch welded steel. It's in poor condition. The coating is corroded, and the wooden supports, which are nearly 60 years old and were mounted right in the marsh, are starting to fail. And that, if you look at the photo on the right, you can see our pipeline actually going across the marsh. And so it's quite a corrosive environment out there. So we're going to be replacing that with a new 4-inch welded steel pipe, and we'll be installing new supports similar to what you see on the left of our pipe. That pipe on the left of ours is a PG&E gas line, which was installed about 10 years ago. And so our supports will probably look like that, but they'll be much beefier because we do have a bigger load to handle. So right now, we're doing quite a number of things. We're going through the environmental documentation and securing the permits needed for this work. We're doing the design work, and we're also keeping in contact with the residents out there, letting them know where we're at with this project.
Mike, are you doing anything for sea level rise on that thing?
You mean as far as keeping it out of the water line?
Yeah.
I don't know, Alex, are we going to be, is it going to be higher?
Yeah, actually, this is an interesting design because we're going to actually put the pipe on rollers that have basically like a threaded component on each side, so we could adjust the pipe vertically in the future to account for sea level. Yeah, that's being accounted for.
You're going to have to exercise your valves to make sure they work.
Yes,
your risers.
Yeah.
Okay, next slide, please, Chuck. So the next project is another interesting one for us. It's also a pipeline replacement project. This is our 3rd Street pipeline replacement project, which will take place in San Rafael. We're replacing 6,300 feet of 90-year-old cast iron. It's 6-inch diameter cast iron. We're replacing it with 8-inch. And you can imagine 3rd Street's a very busy street. So we're replacing from Irwin to E Street. There's a couple other sections that we're replacing as well. But this project, we're doing it as a joint project with the city of San Rafael. They've got quite an ambitious road rehabilitation project taking place on 3rd Street. And so they will be incorporating our pipeline replacement project in their road project, similar to what we're doing with the county on the Sir Francis Drake project, which has served us well. There's less disruption to the public. When the project is done, the city gets a really nice street, and we get a brand new pipeline that's going to last 100 years at least. So we'll be bringing that agreement to the board probably later this spring, and then construction will begin probably later this summer. This is about a $1.7 to $2 million project.
That area also can flood during high tides. It has.
3rd Street.
Another interesting observation.
And then Chuck, if you could go to the next slide. So this project is, I wanted to highlight a fire flow improvement project. So this is our Ridge Road fire flow improvement project, which is taking place in Tiburon and includes replacement of about 4,800 feet of 69-year-old cast iron. We'll be increasing the size of this pipe from 6 to 8 inch. And this is about a $1.7 million project, which we're currently in design, and construction will begin later this year. We should finish this one in the fall of 2021. Next slide, please. So then moving on to storage tanks and cathodic protection. The 2-year budget includes $8.9 million in projects for storage tanks and cathodic protection. The major project is our Smith Saddle Tanks Rehabilitation Project, which we have spoken with you about as part of the 10-year financial plan. As you recall, the 2 Smith Saddle tanks hold about 10 million gallons in storage. They're key storage facilities for us. They were built in the 1960s, and the exterior coating is original. We recently completed the interior inspection of tank number 2, actually drained the tank and went inside it with our engineers and conducted a detailed inspection. And I'm pleased to report that it looks like we don't have to replace the tanks, that the tank floor, the steel in the floor of the tanks looks good, and the steel in the walls looks good up till about the top 4 feet above the water line. That steel is heavily corroded along with the roof. So we'll be coming back probably in May to the operations committee to give you a full report on this, but it looks like we won't be able to do just a standard recoating project. We will be having to replace the upper 4 feet of the tank walls and also the roof. And so our plan is to rehabilitate 1 tank in the upcoming winter. And then the winter of 22-23, we would rehabilitate the other tank.
So Mike, you would actually replace the up top 4 feet and the roof with new material?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, Alex was telling me that when they looked at the floor, the engineers were really happy. The steel looks great and the walls look good. We were worried that it was going to be pretty bad in there. So
yeah,
thankfully we don't have to replace these tanks.
Yeah.
But we'll get the full report in May. Next slide, please, Chuck. Our budget also includes $6.1 million in funding for our treatment plants. And I want to talk to you about a couple interesting projects we'll be doing. This is our, the photo on the left is an aerial shot of our Bontempi treatment plant. And the round structure on the upper part is our clear well. This is a 2 million gallon tank that was built originally with the treatment plant in the 1960s. It's a concrete tank. We did a detailed inspection of the clear well recently with our structural engineer. And the good news is they looked at this from a seismic and fluid dynamic forces impact, and they said, you know, you're good for seismic. You don't have to do a major seismic upgrade, which is really good news. What does need to be repaired is there's quite a bit of spalling on one of the interior walls, which is exposing rebars you can see in the middle photo. And where this is occurring is on a 14-inch thick wall that was installed in 1995. So the good news is this wall isn't needed to support the roof. And the repair here is to go in and repair the spalling. But what's causing this is the friction between the roof and that new 14-inch thick wall that was installed in 95. And so the structural engineers are recommending we just create a gap between the roof and the wall, and that will stop the concrete from spalling. So this is about a $500,000 project. If you can go to the next slide, please, Chuck. And of course, finishing up our treatment plants, the major project we're doing for San Geronimo, which is shown on the left, is the installation of our emergency generator to provide backup power to San Geronimo in case PG&E conducts further PSPS events, or in case we lose power for any reason out there, we will be able to continue running the plant with a new generator. So our contractor, and the arrow there shows where the new generator is going to be located. The contractor has broken ground out there, and they're installing the retaining wall and the foundation, and we'll continue doing this project, and we anticipate finishing that later this year. If you could go back just one more project I wanted to highlight. The photo on the right is the roof of the San Geronimo treatment plant. And that's the original 60-year-old roof. So we will be replacing that as part of the 2-year budget. And that's about a $1 million project. The new roof will be comprised of non-combustible material. So it's part of our effort to harden our facilities against wildfire events.
That was my next question. I assume it's wood, huh? The current roof.
Is that, do you know, I assume it is too. Is that right, Paul? Do you know the material of the?
The structure is a steel Q deck, I think, the base structure under there. But the covering on there right now is I believe a membrane. So it's a plastic roof right now.
What supports it though?
It's a steel frame, and then something that they call a Q deck, which is that sort of, it's not quite corrugated.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But so the thing you're worried about then, combustibility, is the roof itself.
Right.
Couldn't you just put a layer of gunite over it?
Oh.
I mean, it's just for water tightness, right? If you got it away from the fire side, I mean, do we even know if it burns?
So the roof is not combustible at the moment, but if an ember were to land on it, it would sort of poke a hole in it, if you know what I mean. It wouldn't.
Right. So if we coated it with something, wouldn't that take care of that problem?
Well, theoretically, yes, but the roof has actually failed in a couple of places already. So we'd do some, I'm not sure what the engineered solution would be for them to repair it or replace that membrane, because those membranes have a lifespan.
Sure, but the problem with them, Paul, is sun. And if you keep the sun off of them, it's like a roof. You have the shingles are just for looks and keeping the sun off of the watertight membrane, huh?
Yeah, I think as we dig deeper into this, when we do the engineer's report, we'll be able to bring back to the board a little bit more information about what we find, what the recommendation is. But we know, this is something the treatment plant folks have been asking for a long time. So we'll be doing this as part of the next year.
Is the health department kicking about it?
I'm not, no.
Okay.
Are they putting buckets down? I mean, is the thing leaking?
It's a reservoir, Larry. Underneath is water. It's the clear well for this plant. So it's
No, this is actually on the administration building.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, not clear from your picture. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That picture on the right is actually the administration.
Not the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
So is it actually, Mike, is it actually leaking into the building, or Paul?
In a couple of spaces, yeah. Jim Kenny, our superintendent of water treatment, has his own personal buckets.
That's nice. That's very
nice. we
just like this the community center, the civic center, right? It's got the buckets for it, Frank Lloyd Wright buckets.
Not anymore. $13 million later.
Yeah, it still leaks.
Okay, just a couple more slides here. If you can go to the next one, please, Chuck. Okay, and then the budget also includes $6 million in watershed projects and programs. The first one I wanted to highlight is shown on the left. This is our culvert repair program. And the watershed staff actually made a presentation to the committee back in September about this program. This is really an in-house program of permitting and design and repair and replacement. The example shown here on the upper left is the culvert on Sky Oaks Road, and in the bottom is the repair that our own crews completed for that location. So this is the type of project that we're pursuing through this program, and the budget includes $1.2 million in the next 2 years to continue the culvert repair program. Then the photo in the middle is the Azalea Hill Trail restoration projects, which we'll continue pursuing as part of this budget. The budget includes 1 million in expenditures, and most of that is grant funded. And the watershed committee or watershed staff again gave an update to the watershed committee at the December meeting about this project. And I imagine we'll continue giving updates on the progress as we continue with this project. And then finally, the photo on the lower right is part of our $2.2 million fire and fuels management program, which is included in our CIP budget. Chuck, if you could go to my last slide, my last summary slide. So in summary, the 2-year CIP budget is a total of 48.5 million, with 17.9 million dedicated to pipelines, and then 8.9 dedicated to storage tanks, 6.1 for our treatment plants, and 6 million for watershed. And then finally 4.2 million for capital equipment and IT. And that rounds out our investment of about 48.5 million over the next 2 years. And so I'll turn it back over to Chuck, unless the board has any questions on this.
I got a question, Mike. Do we, I don't know if you read in the paper, the proposal to put in like 1,300 apartments at Northgate, where the mall is.
I did see that.
Do we have purple pipe service over there?
Yeah, I think we do. Paul, can you answer that?
I can, yes, we do, the whole Northgate area, yeah.
So that whole thing needs to be double plumbed.
Yeah.
I mean, for toilets and everything, you know? So, because that's going to be an issue for sure.
Yeah.
Any other board questions on the capital program? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And thanks, Chuck. Before we adjourn, I just want to check to see if there's any public comments on this item.
Okay, let me check. I don't see any hands, but I think Mr. Roberts may have a comment. I just want to double check with him.
Yes, I do.
Okay, all right. I didn't see your hand, sir. Go ahead, you're unmuted.
Just a thought that I want to leave with you is we're going into a drought condition. People are going to be very conscious of the fact that they have to reduce their water use. And something that you might want to think about to include in your capital budget is launching a program for conservation measures such as gray water, rainwater storage, turf, and include that in your capital budget and launch that while we are dealing with this drought. There's not a better time to go to the public and get a good reception to that. And I don't know what the figure should be, but I would suggest that now is the best possible time, a time of crisis, to offer such programs. And you should include that in your capital budget.
Great point.
Yeah,
Great
I
point.
agree.
Totally. That we need to figure that one out for that budget cycle for sure.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we should be subsidizing 1,000-gallon rainwater collection, not 50 gallon tanks, you know.
Director Bragman, just on that one point, the board did adopt a change, maybe it was about a year ago, at our upgraded incentives where we have a per gallon rebate. We no longer limit the size.
Good.
So we have had some folks take us up on much larger.
Yeah.
That's a good point, Larry. When I first moved here in '92, it was in the middle of a drought. And I did an analysis of what size I would need. And it basically is an underground tank.
Yeah.
You know, that to be useful, huh? To basically catch enough rainwater. And you're exactly right. I think it's over 1,000, as I recall, more like 4,000. But because you just need to look at your area and take 3 feet of rain. That's what it takes, 3 feet of water to irrigate the grass. So yeah, you're exactly right. Unfortunately, they're pretty pricey. And at the point I did the return on investment analysis in 92 and cited, couldn't quite make the numbers work.
You can't do just return on investment.
No, of course
You
not.
got 1,000
problem-
gallons of water,
Yeah, but well, that's true. But I mean, 1,000 gallons of water is worth $5. Okay. I mean, if you don't have any, it's worth a lot.
That's how you look at it.
Well, but that's what it cost to buy it from the water district.
Yeah.
So, that's the problem. It's a pretty high bar. And like I say, when you got to get it, it's basically like building a swimming pool, underground swimming pool.
It's
but it's a good idea.
It takes up some space, but
yeah, and the Romans did it.
I mean,
right?
I think in Australia they have tank water they use for domestic water use.
Well, I mean, look at Greece.
Efficient.
All the Greek islands have cisterns. Okay, and that's their old name, cisterns. The Romans had them. Look at the one in Istanbul. There's one the size of 10 Olympic swimming pools under Istanbul, under the old racetrack. Where the chariot races were.
So this wasn't agendized, but next month we are going to have a detailed board discussion on water supply and conservation and be able to get into all this, including pricing. Do we price it on the current value of water, or do we price it looking at alternative water supplies, right? So it'll be a good discussion.
Yeah, well, it's important because we got to harden ourselves against this climate change. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Well, I think the thing, Larry, is that we need to move into the fact that we are in a drought Mediterranean type environment. We live like we're in a water lush environment, right. But we're much more like Greece or Italy than we are like England or someplace in the woods
or Massachusetts even.
That's true too.
I think we all are on the same page about that. I don't want to give the team a hard time because I know how hard you're working, but I continue to be concerned that we're not seeing these kinds of long-term conservation investments reflected in the capital budget. It may be that it's sort of hidden in some of the other categories, but I think particularly in terms of our ability to communicate that these are long-term investments, that the kinds of things that Larry and Larry have just been talking about are infrastructure in exactly the same way that pipes and tanks are. We are not going to get that across until we start treating them that way in our public documents and in our financing. So I realize that's a shift in how water districts typically think about infrastructure, but I think we need to get there. And I don't really think there's any reason for us to not be leading on that.
Can we capitalize those expenses?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. I'm happy to do a presentation for the board on that. Gatsby made that rule change 3 years ago. Ben is smiling because he's tired of hearing me talk about this. Gatsby made a specific change in their explanation of their rules, and those things can be fully capitalized. It is allowed. Denver Water is capitalizing. They're spending $15 million, or no, it may be more than that now, but they're spending municipal bond dollars on their entire lead service line replacement program. That's 100% on private property, all of it. And there's other institutions that are doing similar things with turf changeouts. Las Vegas has been bond finance capitalizing their turf changeout program for 25 years. So it's been the short. I'm sorry, I'm making this longer than you asked, Larry, but the short answer is that it has been allowed for the last 15 years. What happened a couple of years ago as a result of some work that I was involved with in my other life is that there's now been a technical rule clarification that it specifically applies to water districts that want to issue rebates for water conservation and green stormwater programs.
Okay, well, good to know. And I totally agree with you. I do.
Yeah. And by the way, if you come to Tap Into Resilience, which is our conference in 2 weeks, you will have a whole entire session on that for anybody who's interested.
I'll keep it in mind.
All righty.
I had no further public comments.
Great. All right. Unless, Ben, there's something else, I think we are adjourned. Oh, Roger has something. Sorry, I'm seeing his hand.
I see. Yeah, hold on. Go ahead, Mr. Roberts. Go ahead, sir. You're unmuted.
I don't know what's going on with this hand signal, but we're not having any further comment.
All right. We'll let you go, Roger. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Residual
Thank you.
hand. I've gotten caught on that a couple times.
At least we know it works.